After 5 years of saving every penny, cutting coupons, and working overtime shifts at the hospital, I had finally done it. I had purchased my first home. It was not a mansion by any stretch of the imagination, but it was mine. A modest two-bedroom house with a small yard in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Oak Ridge Estates. I remembered the day I got the keys, how I stood on the front porch just staring at the door, hardly believing it was real. I had grown up in apartments my whole life, never having a place that truly belonged to me. This house represented everything I had worked for. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I moved in. The streets were lined with maple trees that turned brilliant shades of orange and red in the fall. Children rode bikes on the sidewalks, and neighbors waved as they collected their mail. I spent that first weekend painting the front door a cheerful blue color and planting flower beds along the walkway. I installed solar-powered lights along the driveway and hung wind chimes from the porch. Each small detail made the house feel more like home. I met most of my neighbors during that first month. The retired couple next door brought over a homemade pie. The young family across the street invited me to their weekend barbecue. Everyone seemed welcoming and kind. Then I met Karen Westfield. She lived in the largest house on the block, a sprawling two-story with perfect landscaping and a three-car garage. I first saw her while I was mowing my lawn. She pulled into her driveway in a shiny black Porsche Cayenne that probably cost more than my annual salary. "Hello there, you must be the new neighbor," she called out, her voice carrying across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated our properties. She wore designer sunglasses and clothing that looked expensive even from a distance. Her smile was wide but did not quite reach her eyes. Something about her made me uneasy, though I could not place why at the time. Karen explained that she was the president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowner Association. "We have certain standards here," she said, glancing at my modest home with what looked like a hint of disdain. "I am sure you will want to review the HOA guidelines. We take neighborhood aesthetics very seriously." I nodded politely, making a mental note to read through the handbook I had received during closing. Little did I know that Karen would soon become the bane of my existence. The first incident happened about 2 weeks after our initial meeting. I was heading out for a grocery run when I discovered her Porsche partially blocking my driveway. The rear end of her vehicle extended just far enough that I would have to drive over her perfectly manicured lawn to get around it. I assumed it was an honest mistake. I walked over to her house and rang the doorbell. Karen answered wearing what looked like tennis clothes. "Yes," she asked, not bothering with a greeting. "Good morning, I noticed your car is partially blocking my driveway," I explained, keeping my tone friendly. "I need to head out for errands. Would you mind moving it?" She glanced at her watch as if I was inconveniencing her. "Oh, I am just leaving for tennis. It is barely in your way. You can squeeze by if you are careful." "Actually, I cannot. Your car is too far into my driveway space," I clarified. Karen sighed dramatically. "Fine, give me a minute." She closed the door without another word. 5 minutes later, she emerged, taking her time to get to her car. She moved it exactly enough that I could just barely navigate out of my driveway if I was extremely careful. As she pulled away, she did not wave or acknowledge me. It was such a small thing, but something about her dismissive attitude left me feeling unsettled. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of what would become a neighborhood nightmare. Over the next few months, Karen's Porsche began appearing in front of my driveway with alarming regularity. At first, it was once every couple of weeks. I would find her vehicle perfectly positioned to make exiting my driveway either extremely difficult or completely impossible. Each time, I would go through the same routine of knocking on her door and politely asking her to move. As the weeks passed, her excuses grew more dismissive. "I was only going to be there for 5 minutes. The street parking is limited. It is barely blocking you." Her tone grew increasingly condescending, as if my request to access my own driveway was an unreasonable imposition on her life. By the third month in my new home, I started documenting the incidents. I took date-stamped photos on my phone each time I found her car blocking my access. I also began writing down our interactions, noting the time and her responses. Something told me I might need this evidence eventually. The frequency increased to once a week, then twice. I started leaving polite notes under her windshield wipers. "Please do not block my driveway. I need constant access for work emergencies." The notes disappeared, but the behavior continued. I sent text messages after getting her number from a neighborhood directory. She would respond hours later with brief, unapologetic replies like, "Moved it," or "Not there anymore." The situation began affecting my daily life. I was late to work twice when I found her car blocking me in the morning. I missed a delivery because the truck could not access my driveway. I had to cancel dinner plans with friends when I returned home to find myself blocked in with no way to reach Karen, who was apparently out of town for the weekend. I tried speaking with other neighbors about the situation, hoping for advice or support. Their reactions were telling. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street lowered her voice as if afraid of being overheard. "Karen has been here the longest," she whispered. "She knows everyone on the HOA board and most of the city council members. Her husband is some big-shot attorney. Most people just try to stay on her good side." Mr. Jenkins, the retired postal worker who lived 2 doors down, was more direct. "That woman has gotten 3 neighbors fined for ridiculous HOA violations. She reported the Thompsons for having their garbage cans out 12 hours too long when they were away at a funeral. Nobody stands up to her because nobody wants to be her next target." I learned that Karen held significant influence in our neighborhood. Her husband had helped draft many of the HOA bylaws years ago. She had been president of the association for 5 consecutive terms. Many residents simply accepted her sense of entitlement rather than risk her wrath. Still, I continued trying to resolve the situation amicably. I sent a formal letter requesting that she respect my property boundaries. I even offered to help her identify better parking options if space was genuinely an issue. My efforts were met with increasing hostility. Once, when I approached her about moving her car, she actually rolled her eyes and said, "Some people are so territorial about a little bit of concrete." The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had a specialist medical appointment that I had been waiting 3 months to get. It was for chronic back pain that had been plaguing me since an accident the previous year. I had taken the day off work, prepared all my medical documents, and was ready to leave with plenty of time to spare. When I opened my front door, I saw it immediately. The black Porsche was parked directly across my driveway, leaving no possible way for me to get my car out. I rushed to Karen's house, knocking firmly on her door. No answer. I called her phone straight to voicemail. I sent urgent text messages explaining the situation. No response. As the minutes ticked by, I realized with growing despair that I was going to miss my appointment. I called the medical office, but they confirmed what I already knew: missed appointments could not be rescheduled for at least another 2 to 3 months. I stood in the rain, staring at the gleaming vehicle that had once again disrupted my life. The medical referral papers in my hand grew soggy as raindrops mixed with tears of frustration on my face. This was no longer about inconvenience. This was affecting my health, my well-being, my quality of life. As I walked back to my house, defeated and dripping wet, I made a decision. This pattern of disrespect and entitlement had to end, and if conventional methods were not working, I would need to get creative. That evening, after changing out of my wet clothes and making a cup of hot tea to calm my nerves, I sat down at my kitchen table with a determination I had not felt in years. If Karen was not going to respect basic neighborly boundaries, then I needed to find another approach. I opened my laptop and began researching property laws, easements, and rights of way in our state. I was surprised by how much information was available online. I discovered that my property line extended to include my entire driveway and a portion of the curb directly in front of it. According to municipal code, blocking access to a private driveway was actually a finable offense, though enforcement was often lax in residential neighborhoods. I printed dozens of pages of legal statutes, highlighting the relevant sections about property access and obstruction. The next day, I called my friend Miguel, who worked in the city planning department. I explained my situation without mentioning names. "This is becoming a serious problem," I told him. "What legal options do I have to control access to my own driveway?" Miguel was thoughtful. "Well, technically speaking, your property line likely extends to the street. Check your property survey from when you bought the house. If someone is repeatedly blocking your access, you have every right to control that space." "Control it how exactly?" I asked. "Within reason and local order. Nance's, you could install signage, barriers, or even a gate if the HOA allows it," he explained. "Some people install those folding parking barriers, but those can be easily ignored. The key is documentation and following proper procedures." He suggested I review my HOA guidelines for any restrictions, but emphasized that HOAs generally could not override property rights established by law. Before ending the call, Miguel added, "Just make sure whatever you do is proportional and legal. Document everything in case you need to defend your actions." That night, I pored over my HOA handbook. There were pages of restrictions about paint colors, lawn maintenance, and holiday decorations, but surprisingly little about driveway modifications. The only relevant clause stated that permanent structures visible from the street must be approved by the architectural committee. The definition of permanent seemed vague enough to work with. Over the next week, I sketched various ideas for reclaiming my driveway space. I considered simple solutions like parking bollards or chains, but something about Karen's attitude told me she would simply ignore these. Then, inspired by a toll road I had recently driven on, an idea began to form. What if I treated my driveway like the private property it was? What if access required payment, just like any other private parking facility? The concept of a toll booth seemed absurd at first, even to me, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It would be a clear physical barrier that could not be easily ignored. It would establish that this was private property with regulated access. And most importantly, it would force Karen to acknowledge her actions if she wanted to use my space. I reached out to my friend Carlos, who worked in construction. Over coffee at a local cafe, I showed him my rough sketches for a small but official-looking toll booth structure. His eyebrows rose higher with each detail I described. "You are really serious about this," he said, studying the drawings. "She blocked me in 14 times in 2 months," I replied. "I missed a critical medical appointment. Yes, I am serious." Carlos rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It is definitely doable. We could build it as a modular structure, not permanently attached to the ground, so it technically would not be a permanent addition according to most building codes. We could add good lighting, weatherproofing." He began making notes and adjustments to my design. "How much would materials cost?" I asked. "For something that looks professional, maybe $800 to $1,000, he estimated, but I have some leftover materials from a recent job that could bring that down. As Carlos worked on refining the design and creating a materials list, I researched security cameras that could document any interactions at the toll booth. I found a reasonably priced system that would capture high-definition video with night vision capabilities and store footage on a cloud server. I also created official-looking signage that stated, "Private property, authorized access only. Access fee, $20 per entry. Unauthorized vehicles will be documented and reported." The final piece of the puzzle was finding someone to staff the booth, at least initially. I remembered that my neighbor Sarah had mentioned her brother Marcus was between jobs. He had previously worked in security and had a calm, professional demeanor. I approached Sarah with my plan, swearing her to secrecy. "Marcus would be perfect for this," she said with a gleam in her eye after I explained the situation. "He has dealt with entitled people before in his security work. Plus, he could use the temporary income while he job hunts." Throughout this planning phase, Karen continued her behavior unabated. The black Porsche appeared across my driveway with frustrating regularity. But now, instead of feeling helpless rage, I felt a growing sense of anticipation each time I documented another incident. Each photo was more evidence, each interaction more fuel for my resolve. By the end of the month, I had a complete plan: detailed construction drawings, a materials list, security camera specifications, official signage designs, and a willing booth attendant. All while Karen remained blissfully unaware that her actions were about to have consequences. As I finalized the last details, I could not help but smile at the thought of what was coming. The construction day was set for a Saturday, when Karen typically attended her weekly tennis lessons, followed by lunch with friends. According to the neighborhood grapevine, she would be gone from 9 in the morning until at least 3 in the afternoon. This gave us a solid 6-hour window to complete the bulk of the work without interference. Carlos arrived at 7:30 with his pickup truck loaded with lumber, tools, and other materials. He was followed by 3 more vehicles carrying friends who had volunteered. Ready to help, all of them having heard snippets of my ongoing battle with Karen and eager to be part of the solution. Sarah brought coffee and donuts, while her husband Rob brought his power tools. Even Mr. Jenkins from down the street showed up, saying he was too old to lift lumber but could sure hand out nails. We began by marking the exact location for the toll booth. It would sit at the edge of my property line, just before my driveway met the street. Carlos had cleverly designed it as a sturdy but technically temporary structure. The base consisted of pressure-treated wood that would rest on concrete pavers rather than being sunk into the ground. This distinction was important for both legal and HOA compliance reasons. "Remember, we are not building a permanent structure," Carlos reminded everyone as we got started. "Everything is modular and could theoretically be moved if needed." The frame went up surprisingly quickly with so many hands helping. By mid-morning, we had the basic structure assembled, a small booth approximately 4 feet by 4 feet, with a window facing the street and a door at the back. We added a hinged gate arm that could be raised and lowered to control access, painted in classic red and white stripes for maximum visibility. While the construction team worked on the booth itself, I focused on the technological aspects. I installed the security camera system with one camera aimed directly at the booth to capture all interactions, another covering the length of the driveway, and a third positioned to view the street approach. All 3 cameras fed to a digital video recorder in my home office and backed up footage to cloud storage. Sarah's husband Rob, who worked in graphic design, had helped me create professional-looking signage. The main sign clearly stated the private property policy, access fees, and consequences for unauthorized parking. We mounted this prominently on the front of the booth. A smaller sign displayed the operating hours and a QR code that linked to relevant municipal codes about driveway obstruction. By early afternoon, the booth was taking shape in remarkable fashion. It was not just functional, but looked surprisingly official with its neat construction and professional paint job in neutral gray with dark blue trim. Carlos had added weatherproofing and installed proper electrical wiring for lighting and a small space heater for chilly days. Rob even installed a small receipt printer that could generate official-looking access permits. "This is the most over-engineered revenge project I have ever been part of," laughed Miguel, who had stopped by to see our progress during his lunch break. "But I have to admit, it is completely within your rights as a property owner." While the finishing touches were being added to the booth, I met with Marcus to go over procedures. We sat at my kitchen table with a binder I had prepared outlining exactly how to handle various scenarios. "The standard fee is $20 per use of my driveway," I explained. "Anyone can pay it if they want to park there. The point is not to make money, but to establish that this is private property with controlled access." Marcus nodded seriously, reviewing the procedures. He was in his mid-30s with a solid build and a calm, authoritative presence from his years in security work. "What about if she refuses to pay but tries to park anyway?" he asked. "Document it on the incident log, ensure the cameras are recording, and politely but firmly explain that unauthorized vehicles may be reported to city parking enforcement," I replied. "Under no circumstances should you engage in arguments or physical confrontation. This is about establishing boundaries, not creating conflict." We went through various scenarios, from simple compliance to potential confrontation. Marcus took notes and asked thoughtful questions. By the end of our meeting, he seemed confident in his role. "I will treat this like any professional security position," he assured me. "Calm, courteous, but firm enforcement of the stated policies." As evening approached, we put the final touches on the toll booth. Solar-powered path lights illuminated the approach, and a motion-activated spotlight ensured the area would be well lit at night. The booth itself contained a small desk, a comfortable chair, a lockbox for collecting fees, and a binder with all relevant documentation. I stood back and surveyed our day's work with a mixture of nervousness and satisfaction. What had started as a half-serious concept had manifested into a surprisingly professional installation. The toll booth looked official and legitimate, not like some hastily constructed eyesore. "What do you think Karen will do when she sees this?" Sarah asked, standing beside me. "I honestly do not know," I admitted. "But whatever happens, it will be on camera, and I will have documentation of every step that led to this point." As my friends gathered our tools and prepared to leave, each offered words of support and promises to be available if needed. Carlos did a final check of the construction, ensuring everything was secure and functioning properly. Miguel confirmed once more that I was within my legal rights as a property owner. That night I barely slept. I kept getting up to look out the window at the toll booth, illuminated by the soft glow of the path lights. It stood as a physical manifestation of my refusal to be walked over any longer. I had tried reason, I had tried politeness, I had tried conventional methods. Now it was time for creativity and firm boundaries. Marcus would arrive at 7 the next morning to begin his first shift. I had a feeling Karen would not be far behind once she discovered the new addition to the neighborhood. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I felt a strange calm. Whatever happened next, I was prepared. Sunday morning arrived with clear skies and a tense anticipation hanging in the air. Marcus arrived precisely at 7, dressed in a navy blue button-up shirt and khaki pants that gave him a professional, authoritative appearance. I provided him with a clipboard containing all the necessary documentation, a name badge that read Private Property Access Manager, and a brief refresher on procedures. "Remember, stay calm no matter what happens," I reminded him. "Everything is being recorded, and our actions need to be reasonable and professional." Marcus nodded seriously. "I have dealt with much more challenging situations in my security career. This will be fine." From my home office window, I had a clear view of the toll booth and the street beyond. The security camera feeds were displayed on my computer monitor, allowing me to watch and record everything that transpired. Now all we had to do was wait. The neighborhood was quiet that Sunday morning. A few joggers passed by, doing double takes at the new structure. An elderly couple walking their dog stopped to read the sign, then continued on with amused expressions. But there was no sign of Karen or her Porsche. Around 9:30, I heard it before I saw it, the distinctive purr of a high-performance German engine. The black Porsche turned onto our street, moving at its usual unhurried pace. Through the camera feed, I watched as Karen approached, one hand casually draped over the steering wheel. The moment she spotted the toll booth was almost cinematic. Her vehicle actually jerked to a stop as she hit the brakes too suddenly. For several seconds, she simply sat there, staring through her windshield at the structure now blocking her habitual parking spot. I could almost see the thoughts racing across her face, visible even through the camera feed. Disbelief, confusion, then dawning anger. Karen pulled her Porsche alongside the toll booth, rolling down her window. Marcus approached with professional courtesy. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to 1432 Maple Street Private Access Point. Are you looking to use this driveway today?" His tone was polite but firm, exactly as we had practiced. "What is this?" Karen demanded, gesturing at the booth. "What is this thing doing here?" "This is a controlled access point for the private property at this address," Marcus explained, pointing to the signage. "Access requires authorization and payment of the posted fee." Karen's expression shifted from confusion to indignation. "This is ridiculous. I park here all the time. You cannot just put up a toll booth on a public street." "Actually, ma'am, this is not public street parking. This is a private driveway entrance. The property line extends to the street, as documented in the county property records." Marcus maintained his professional demeanor while gesturing to the relevant information on his clipboard. "I am going to park here like I always do," Karen declared, beginning to edge her vehicle forward. Marcus stepped into view of her car. "Ma'am, I need to inform you that unauthorized vehicles will be documented and reported to parking enforcement. If you wish to use this space, the access fee is $20 per entry." Karen's face flushed with color. $20? That is highway robbery. I am not paying $20 to park on a public street. "Again, this is not public street parking. This is private property access," Marcus corrected calmly. "The fee applies to anyone wishing to use this space. It is the property owner's right to control access to their driveway." By this point, Karen was fuming. She pulled out her phone. "I am calling my husband right now. He is an attorney and this is completely illegal. You cannot do this." "You are welcome to consult with legal counsel, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Would you like an information packet detailing the relevant property laws and municipal codes?" This seemed to escalate her anger further. "I want to speak to the homeowner, now." That was my cue. I had anticipated this moment and prepared for I walked calmly from my house to the toll booth, carrying a folder containing all my documentation. As I approached, I could see several neighbors had emerged onto their porches or front yards, watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. "Good morning, Karen," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the toll booth. "You cannot just build structures on the street. This is against HOA regulations, and I am going to make sure you are fined and forced to remove it." I opened my folder. Actually, I have reviewed the HOA guidelines thoroughly. This structure is compliant as it is not permanently attached to the ground and serves as a functional access control point for my private property. I have all the documentation here. I pulled out the first set of papers. These are date-stamped photographs documenting 14 separate instances over the past 2 months where your vehicle blocked my driveway. "This one," I said, pointing to a particular photo, "was taken Tuesday when I missed my specialist medical appointment that I had been waiting 3 months for." Karen's expression flickered briefly before hardening again. "My car was barely in your way. You could have maneuvered around it." "These measurements show otherwise," I countered, producing another document. "And according to Municipal Code Section 1256-330, blocking a private driveway is a finable offense. I have been more than patient with multiple requests for you to stop this behavior." Karen's husband was apparently on the other end of her phone now. I could hear his voice asking questions as she held the phone up. "There is a toll booth in front of their driveway. They are trying to charge me to park where I always park." After a moment, she thrust the phone toward me. "My husband wants to speak with you." I accepted the phone calmly. "Hello, yes, this is the homeowner at 1432 Maple Street." I listened as he introduced himself as Richard Westfield, attorney at law, and began making various legal threats. When he finished, I responded calmly. "Mr. Westfield, I understand your concern. However, I have documented 14 instances of your wife's vehicle blocking my private driveway. I have made multiple polite requests for this to stop. I have consulted with the city planning department regarding property boundaries and access rights. I am within my legal rights to control access to my private property, which includes my driveway and the access point to it. If you would like to discuss this further, I welcome a formal meeting with documentation from both sides present." There was a long pause before he responded with a noticeably less aggressive tone, saying he would look into the matter. When I handed the phone back to Karen, her expression had changed. She seemed less certain now. "This is still going to the HOA board," she declared, though with less conviction than before. "This eyesore is bringing down property values." "You are welcome to raise it with the board," I replied. "I will bring my documentation of your repeated violations as well. In the meantime, would you like to pay the access fee to use my driveway today, or would you prefer to find alternative parking?" Karen stared at me for a long moment, then at Marcus, then at the growing number of neighbors watching from a distance. Without another word, she put her car in gear and drove away, parking several houses down the street. As she stalked towards her house, I noticed something unexpected. One of my neighbors gave me a subtle thumbs up. Another nodded approvingly. Later that afternoon, Sarah from next door brought over cookies and whispered, "She has been parking in front of my garden and killing my plants for years. I am so glad someone finally stood up to her." The battle lines had been drawn, but for the first time since moving in, I felt like I might not be fighting alone. The aftermath of the first confrontation brought a few days of blissful peace. Karen's Porsche was conspicuously absent from my driveway, instead appearing in various other spots around the neighborhood. I noticed her giving my house cold glares whenever our paths crossed, but the toll booth stood untested. That changed on Thursday when a certified letter arrived from Westfield and Associates, clearly her husband's law firm. The letter was filled with legal terminology and vague threats, claiming the toll booth was an unauthorized structure, a violation of HOA aesthetic standards, and an unlawful obstruction of a public right-of-way. It demanded that I remove the structure within 48 hours or face legal action. I immediately contacted a lawyer friend who had offered to help if things escalated. Emily Graham had experience with property disputes and HOA conflicts. She reviewed the letter during her lunch break and called me back that afternoon. "This letter is mostly intimidation tactics," Emily explained. Ray throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Your toll booth is on your property line, not in the public right-of-way. It is not a permanent structure by definition. And while the HOA might have some grounds to object on aesthetic grounds, they would need to prove it violates specific bylaws. Emily helped me draft a formal response, citing relevant property laws and including copies of my documentation of Karen's repeated driveway blocking. We ended the letter with an offer to discuss a resolution that would address both parties' concerns, provided that any solution included respecting my property boundaries. 2 days after sending our response, I received notice of an emergency HOA board meeting to address recent neighborhood structural additions and their impact on community aesthetics. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. It was clear that Karen was escalating this to her home turf, the HOA board, where she held significant influence. I spent the weekend preparing for the meeting. Emily helped me organize my documentation into a clear, chronological presentation. I created a simple PowerPoint with photographs, dates, and references to relevant HOA bylaws and municipal codes. I practiced delivering my points calmly and factually, without letting emotion override my message. The night of the meeting arrived, and I entered the community center to find it more crowded than I had expected. It seemed the toll booth situation had become something of a neighborhood spectacle. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by her husband and 2 men in business attire who I assumed were associates from his law firm. She was dressed impeccably in what appeared to be designer clothing, projecting an image of affluence and authority. The board president, a middle-aged man named Douglas, who I recognized from neighborhood gatherings, called the meeting to order. After brief introductions, Karen was invited to present her case. She approached the podium with practiced confidence, her husband controlling a laptop that projected photos of my toll booth onto the wall screen. Board members and neighbors, I come before you tonight deeply concerned about recent developments in our beautiful community, she began. This unauthorized structure has appeared on Maple Street, creating an eyesore and potential safety hazard. The photos she showed were clearly taken from angles designed to make the toll booth look as unappealing as possible. Her presentation labeled it unsightly, dangerous, and damaging to property values. She cited HOA bylaws about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics and suggested that allowing such a structure would set a dangerous precedent. "What will be next?" she asked dramatically. "Vendor stands, advertising billboards. We must maintain the standards that make Oak Ridge Estates a desirable place to live." When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with my USB drive containing my presentation. I connected it to the laptop and began with a simple statement. I installed this access control point after exhausting all other reasonable options to prevent my driveway from being repeatedly blocked, I explained calmly. I would like to show you what led to this decision. My presentation began with the chronological documentation of Karen's Porsche blocking my driveway, 14 separate incidents with dates, times, and photographs. I showed screenshots of text messages and copies of notes I had left asking her to stop. I included the photo from the rainy day when I missed my medical appointment. I attempted to resolve this situation amicably multiple times, I continued. When that failed, I researched my options as a property owner and installed a structure that is compliant with both HOA regulations and municipal codes. As I spoke, I noticed something surprising happening in the room. Several neighbors were nodding in agreement. When I mentioned the missed medical appointment, I heard a sympathetic murmur ripple through the audience. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman named Mrs. Chen raised her hand and asked to speak. Karen has been parking in front of my flower beds for years, killing my plants with her exhaust. When I asked her to stop, she said the street was public property and she could park wherever she wanted. Another neighbor, Dave from 3 houses down, spoke up next. She regularly blocks my mail delivery with her car. The postal carrier has to get out and walk around her vehicle to reach my mailbox. One by one, other residents began sharing their own stories of Karen's entitled behavior throughout the neighborhood. The meeting that she had orchestrated to condemn my toll booth had transformed into something quite different, a community finally giving voice to years of frustration with her behavior. I watched Karen's composed facade begin to crack as more neighbors spoke. Her husband whispered gently in her ear, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. When the board finally called for a vote on whether my toll booth violated HOA regulations, the result was surprising. By a vote of 4-1, they determined that the structure was acceptable as a temporary access control measure until a permanent resolution to ongoing driveway access issues could be reached. The lone dissenting vote came from Karen's close friend on the board. As the meeting adjourned, I caught Karen's expression, a mixture of disbelief and barely contained rage. For perhaps the first time in her experience in our neighborhood, her influence had failed to get her what she wanted. The balance of power had shifted, and we both knew it.